all your school rugby, all in one place. This is Next Gen 50.
Alright guys, welcome to Next Gen 15, and in today's video what we're going to be doing is looking back at the predictions we made last year about the 2020s in rugby. So if you are new to our channel, please don't forget to click that subscribe button as well as bell notification, and as soon as new videos are released you'll be the first to know. So let's get back into the predictions and see where we're sitting at the moment. So the first prediction that was made was the death of the quota system. Basically, if you take a look at the talent coming through at school and junior level, I really strongly feel that we won't even be discussing a quota system in the future. I think there was a time where you could talk about a quota system perhaps being an issue in South African rugby, but just with the sheer amount of talent coming through, I don't think that's the case. And I think it'll become more evident in the future with the amount of talent coming through. I'm talking, I'm looking at under 14, under 15 players and all the rest of it, and there's some frightening talents coming out of the system. So I think that it'll be probably just after the next World Cup, maybe around 2024, when we're going to completely ignore the quota system and not even talk about it. And it's just going to be a fact that the team is going to be more representative, in terms of demographics and all the rest of it. And there's some frightening talent coming through. So I do think this is on its way to happening, and hasn't completely happened yet. Even though last year's World Cup squad, was a decent mix, if you want to say it. I still think that there are a few people that would say, certain players might be there because of being previously disadvantaged, or players of colour, however you want to term it. But I think that's going to completely change, and like I said, I think we're going to really recognise that just around about the middle of this decade. That's what I feel. Second prediction was the death of Super Rugby. Now, when I first said this, a lot of people called me a clown. They said, there's no way this is happening. We need this. This will always be in place. And I can happily say that I was right, and I'm happy that I'm right. Now, if you take a look at what we've done, guys, remember I made these predictions when it was still Next Gen Rugby. The combination with 15 Rugby and Cheers Mate Productions means that there's going to be a lot more focus on this channel in terms of South African school rugby and UK school rugby. And the fact that we're going to be playing our rugby in the Northern Hemisphere now means the timing is ideal. I didn't do this necessarily only for selfish reasons in terms of this prediction and my hopes that this would happen. It wasn't only because of the move that this channel has made. It was also very much about the logic to me. It was just a case of while we flying halfway across the world in crazy time zones, where we don't really have much of a presence as South Africans, when there's a lot of South Africans already based in England in terms of the professional structures, well, in Europe in general, and the time zone works out, and the money's over there. I mean, Australia, they got rugby league, they don't care about union, and in New Zealand the population just isn't there. So to me, it is always logical that one block is formed by Japan, New Zealand and Australia, and another block basically be formed by South Africa and the Northern Hemisphere markets. And it just made complete sense. I wish they'd called it something different than the Rainbow Cup, though. I don't know. That doesn't really roll off the tongue, you had Super Rugby and you had like the Rugby Championship, and now it's like the Rainbow Cup. So, that's my only criticism, but everything else I'm very happy about it. So this prediction came true a lot earlier than I expected. I thought this would only come true after the World Cups. I thought 2023, 2024 this would come true, but COVID pushed things forward. So interesting. Next prediction, the end of All Black dominance. I think based on last year's results, another one that very early, was a very early call. This I sort of expected a year before the Rugby World Cup, around about 2022. But you take a look at it, first time they ever lost to Argentina, didn't have their own way against the Aussies. I really think that aura of invincibility is slowly starting to disappear for the All Blacks. Last year, would they have been the best team in the world? If we played them, what would the result been? I don't know. I still really respect New Zealand rugby, and I was never thinking that they would not be number one in the world or not win a World Cup. But you must remember, you've had 20 years of like 90% win rates. That couldn't be sustained for the long term. And that's what I felt like. Any team that wins 65, 70% of their matches is pretty dominant. To win 95% of your matches is just madness. So it was a pretty easy prediction when you look at it on paper, but I never thought it would come to fruition that quick, especially considering that Argentina played in New Zealand. So yeah, we'll see what happens in the next couple of years, but I still believe that basically what I think will happen, guys, is that rugby league will continue growing in Australia. There's going to be more money in rugby league than rugby union, and I think rugby league is going to make massive inroads into New Zealand. And I think that's gonna like make rugby struggle a little bit, to be honest with you, rugby union. Also, New Zealand rugby is having a big problem with basketball taking a lot of talent away. If you take a look at the numbers and the stats in New Zealand, and this is not a criticism about New Zealand rugby. I've got a hell of a lot of respect for New Zealand rugby, the players, the culture, all the rest of it. But the problem is that a lot of the game, in terms of the administrators, is still being run in the 20th century, so to speak. It's not an open market. There's no production line. There's no financial incentive to produce players to sell on to richer clubs in richer markets, as is done in soccer. There's just not the population in New Zealand to sustain the game on the same levels like in the American market, for example, where you got over 100 million population. You got a 4 million population there. You got a neighbor next door with 30 plus million people, a lot more money, and a sport that can basically pay like far higher salaries. So it really, really is a problem, and I think that New Zealand's under threat with this. And like I've said before, an open market, which we'll get to later, I'll expand upon it a bit more, but an open market ultimately would result in a New Zealand team producing a player of high quality like Dan Carter and then selling it on to a club in France or England for millions upon millions of pounds, and then basically putting that money back into development. But New Zealand rugby doesn't want to do that. They want to hold on to all their players in a very small market, and that pie I just think is going to get smaller and smaller. And I think, honestly, guys, I think this is the main result why All Black dominance is going to slowly come to an end, because the external threats are huge, and they're really going to have to change their way of thinking, because what worked in the past for so long is certainly not going to work in the future. Fourth prediction, the rise of France. Look, they had a very low base to start with. You know what I mean? They had a very low base. I mean, they lost to Fiji a couple of years ago, and the rugby just wasn't looking good there. But I think there's a massive change, and if you take a look at the young talent coming through, it's ridiculous amount of young talent that's coming through. I think the backline is going to be, for the next 10 years, the best in the world. I mean, you got Intermac, you got Arthur Vincent, you've got Louis Carbonell. You've got so many players that are going to be world class, if not Romain Intermac is world class right now. You got Demba Bamba in the forwards, for example. There's a lot of exciting talent coming out of France, and I thought they would start clicking again. A lot of the stuff I thought mid-decade we'd start to see the results, but we're seeing the results right now with France. They're looking very good, and Antoine Dupont is looking at a scrum half of Gareth Edwards' caliber, like historically great. So if they can continue, I think the rise of France will come a lot sooner than we see. And they could be real contenders in 2023. I really felt they were going to win the 2027 World Cup quite comfortably with the players they have and the sort of culture and team they're developing. I thought 2023 was a little bit early with them, but honestly, the way I see it right now and the fact that the World Cup will be there, it's theirs for the taking. Prediction number 5, Zimbabwe emerges. This, I think, will be towards the end of the decade. We really see this happening. And our basis on the fact that, look, in South Africa, there's a hell of a lot of young talent. We know that. I mean, a heck of a lot of young talent. But the amount of young Zimbabwean qualified talent in South Africa is frightening. There's some great players there. I mean, you're looking at someone like Enos Ndiaye from the Sharks, who's just an outstanding player. And, he might have a problem making the Springboks one day, but he qualifies for Zimbabwe, so why wouldn't he play for Zimbabwe? You got Vernon Matongo and Munash Mere, who are two outstanding props. So already you got something there that sort of forms the base for an outstanding tight five. And then you got Tabani, I'm not going to try and pronounce his surname right now, from East Wednesday St. Stidians. He's just signed a contract in France. The guy's an outstanding athlete. I mean, the athleticism is mad. So he could go over to France, work through the system there with world-class coaches and still represent Zimbabwe at international level in the future. I think that's an ideal scenario. So I think towards the end of this decade, we're going to see a lot of these school players who qualify for Zimbabwe, but were sort of educated in South Africa and played their rugby in South Africa. And, some of them go over to Europe and perform very well there, but still can play their rugby in Zimbabwe. So I really think we could see something quite outstanding here. The level of athleticism that these guys have genetically is just out of this world. I mean, Monashe, for example, is a beast. This guy's a very, very powerful player. It's the same as Vernon. He doesn't step back for anyone. Same as RHINOS. I mean, that's why I mentioned these guys. I mean, they're very strong, big boys, physical guys. So, I'm not saying that Zimbabwean rugby will become world beaters, but I really think that there's something here where Zimbabwean rugby can really, really rise up and at least be, sort of a tier 2 force, so to speak. Next prediction, free player movement. This is what I alluded to earlier. It has to happen, guys. It has to happen. You need a production line. So South Africa doesn't have the economy. New Zealand doesn't have the population. So what we do have ultimately is world-class rugby cultures and an abundance of talent. So the only way you're going to be able to sustain these markets is definitely going to be through free player movement. You got to take a look at Brazil and you got to take a look at Argentina, right? For example, and take a look at your sort of, for want of a better word, your tier 2 sort of European nations. You're looking at something like Portugal, for example, right? Even though they got, they're a great soccer team and all the rest of it. They're not up there with Germany, England, France in terms of prestige and in terms of quantity of players produced. Let's not go with prestige. Let's go with quantity of players produced. So the thing is, like Cristiano Ronaldo, he would be going from Sporting Lisbon to Manchester United to Real Madrid, and all along the supply chain, so to speak, value is being created. So Sporting Lisbon get 13 million from Manchester United for developing the player. So Manchester United take him from a raw talent to a world-class talent. And then they sell him on for 85 or 90 million dollars to Real Madrid. And then Real Madrid, he's a superstar and he's part of the Galactico. So there's value along the value chain. Everyone's making money along the way somewhere. If this was rugby, like you look at Dan Carter, he's played at the Crusaders his entire life, basically, right? He goes to Christchurch Boys, he plays for the Crusaders, and every year he's playing Super Rugby and he's playing Rugby Championship, every year without fail. When the Rugby Championship, or Tri Nations or whatever, and Super Rugby all started in 1996, it was very exciting. It was something new, to something different, and it could be sustained for 10, 15 years or whatever it was, because it was exciting and it was new. But it was never going to be something that could be sustained for the long term, because people get bored. What's exciting about the Premier League or European soccer in general is the fact that you've got a transfer market. So, you're spending a lot of time looking at the transfer market and thinking, geez, I wonder if Chelsea's going to sign this player, or I wonder if this player's going to go to Real Madrid. And you basically are able to create fantastic teams and a lot of buzz. And with the transfer market, a lot of value is unlocked because the player's got commercial appeal. There's shirt sales. There's all sorts of benefits that go along the way, and rugby's got a lot to learn with this. And unfortunately, it's not learning. Like I said, I think free movement of players will become a reality, because if they don't do it, for example, New Zealand rugby will go bankrupt. Kids will be far more interested in playing rugby league. They'll lose interest in the sport. And you can call me crazy now, but you are the same people that would have called me crazy when I said Super Rugby was going to end. The world moves very, very quickly, and if you don't move with the times, you're going to get swallowed up. And I really think this is a danger. South Africa's already done it, guys. Already you see what's happening here is that players are being produced to a certain level over here. They go overseas to England or France or wherever. But right now, I'm not too sure if there's a transfer market where South African clubs are actually earning money for this. So there has to be a transfer market formed. But at the moment, if it wasn't for us allowing free movement of players, South African rugby would be stuffed. I mean, it gets to a stage where you think about feeding your family and your future or your national team. Your family comes first every day. So it's inevitable that this is going to happen, in my opinion. Number 7, privatized clubs. I really feel that this is something that will have to be a reality globally, because centralization of contracts worked very well. It's worked very well for Ireland in a lot of ways. It's worked very well for New Zealand in a lot of ways. But the problem with world rugby in general is that it's the focus on revenue is essentially at the international level. There is no league in the world where the national trumps the clubs. Everyone knows that the real revenue is in the club game. That's where all the money really is. The international game, not so much. Yes, international tournaments. I mean, World Cups and championships and all the rest of that. That definitely does create buzz and revenue and all the rest of it. But if you take a look at it, the reason why that happens is because it's basically every 2 years there's a major tournament, right? Not every year. Every year doesn't make sense because it can become boring and predictable. But rugby's got this obsession with getting all the revenue from the international side. They don't want the revenue from the club side. And if you take a look at, do yourself a favor and go onto Google and take a look at the most valuable sports leagues on the planet. It's all club based, because that's where the money is. You create tribalism within the club environment. There's a lot more potential to create more clubs than there are nations. Nations are, are not an infinite supply. Clubs are essentially an infinite supply within reason. You take a look at Johannesburg and Pretoria, for example. You could probably fit like 15, 20 clubs over there instead of 1 or 2 franchises. I'm just saying, for example. But in terms of the franchise system, you got someone that will go to the Southern Kings, for example, and the Southern Kings are dead and buried, and long live the Southern Kings. But you got people that are coming there with money, and then they have to deal with the amateur arm, and the amateur arm is stubborn because they want to maintain power. Of course, it's natural. You want to maintain your position, you want to maintain your salary, you want to maintain the status quo because you're comfortable with the status quo. And if you're comfortable with the status quo, it's because you benefit from the status quo. No one's going to give up anything that they have very easily. But if SARU allowed 100% ownership of clubs by private interests, I think the game would explode. And I think it's going to happen inevitably. I think that it has to be done because you can't keep on propping up clubs or unions or whatever you call them indefinitely. You can't keep pouring money into something that's not sustainable, not making money. If it's 100% private owned and it goes bankrupt, that private owner is responsible for the funds. He's responsible for keeping the team alive. If it goes into liquidation, if they're not performing, they basically get stripped of their right to compete in a specific league. Same is done in soccer. And the reason I keep on saying soccer instead of football is because we talk about football in American context and soccer in the South African context, just so we don't mix up the two sports up. But I think you guys ultimately understand what I mean by this. We have to have a system where clubs can be privatized. Anything where there's a centralized power leads to bureaucracy. And when you got bureaucracy, what ends up happening is you have very, very, very average people fighting for their positions, and there's no accountability. In a private system, if you crap at what you do, you get kicked out. In a bureaucracy, if you crap at what you do, you have someone higher up that will protect you so long as he can rely on your vote. It's just a system that promotes mediocrity. And if rugby wants to move forward, it has to allow for the privatization of clubs. And it's inevitable it will happen because rugby must be the only sport where you've got rugby 10s, rugby 7s, rugby this, rugby that. the sport is basically begging to break out and become a professional and global sport. It's begging for it to happen. It's taken on so many different heads: rugby league, rugby sevens, rugby tens. I don't know what's going to happen next, because ultimately it wants to break free. It's a natural inclination to want to break free and allow the free market to thrive. So eventually they'll wake up, I reckon, and we'll see privatized clubs. Number 8, the birth of the super club. And I think the thing with privatized clubs is that you'll basically have a money center. Like you take a look at soccer, it's Europe. You take a look at obviously American football and baseball and all the rest of it's obviously North America as well as America. But at the end of the day, I think in terms of rugby, the center of power is definitely going to be in Europe, just because of the population and the money available. So I think you could sort of see a situation with privatization, a super club will come about. Like you'll have like a Roman Abramovich type player coming in and looking at the situation and saying, I could either buy a soccer club for, $2 billion or whatever it is, and hopefully get it up to $3 or $4 billion, or I could buy a rugby club for like $30 or $40 million, and I could buy the best players in the world for pennies on the dollar right now, and I could unlock real value in the future. People will see this. The minute you allow 100% privatization, you are going to have the super club, and once you have the super club, you have more eyes on the screen. Once you have more eyes on the screen, you change the culture, you change the dynamic, and super clubs are an inevitable end to this process that's required for rugby to become a global sport. And I do believe this will happen towards the middle of the decade. I'm very confident this will happen, because if it doesn't happen, you're going to have other sports taking over. I really do believe that. And I think that one of the biggest threats to rugby union, as we know it, the game we all love, actually is someone getting a lot of money together and starting a certain type of competition in the United States market. There are whispers this is happening. I'm not going to go too much into it. I'm actually in talks with some parties now. But if this happens, I'm very confident that rugby union as we know it will be in big trouble, and I don't want to see that happen. I'm a purist. I love the 15-man version of the game. I don't want to see anything else happen. So I think it will naturally have to happen, and once it does, I do think we're going to see super clubs, and you'll have a young player from South Africa or New Zealand or Fiji. You'll go to a tier 2 club, for example, in Ireland or Wales or whatever, and then he'll play, and then a Real Madrid type club in France, like a Montpellier or something like that. That'll be the ultimate objective. I think it's healthy for the game. Number 9, rise of the RHINOS. I think definitely not anytime soon. Towards the end of the decade, I think South African Rugby League will be quite healthy. And healthy, I'm not talking about world class. I'm just talking about being able to qualify for Rugby League, World Cups and all the rest of it. There are already a lot of Australian clubs looking at South African players. I know some people that are quite high up in Rugby League in Australia, and I've had some chats to them about some local players. And right now, a lot of them are a little bit nervous of pulling the trigger. But there was a couple of guys that were not for COVID would have been over there now. A good couple of guys. And before you have a laugh, you must remember that I think Lebanon has a competitive rugby league team, because there's a lot of Lebanese immigrants in Australia that have grown up to be very good rugby league players. And even though no one in Lebanon really knows what rugby league is because of these descendants, they've got a very competitive rugby league team. Papua New Guinea is another one that's got a decent rugby league team and a decent rugby league culture. So I think what will happen is that because right now in South Africa, you've only got like 2 or 3 teams that can afford to contract players. France aren't going to sign 100 youngsters every year. And there's definitely going to be a space there for young talent to make the transition to rugby league. And I think once that starts filtering through, we're going to start seeing the South African RHINOS actually be a lot more competitive at senior level. So, like I said, I think this will happen very much towards the end of the decade, 2027, 2028, but we'll see. Then final prediction, a push to the USA. I think that due to the success of the World Cup in Japan, I just thought the game is pretty healthy there, and I think it will continue to grow over there. And I think there'll definitely be a push by the IRB or World Rugby to really make inroads in terms of the USA market. I think they see massive opportunity there. It just depends on how they choose to execute this, because at the end of the day, it's never going to be at the level of American football or baseball, basketball. It's never going to be at that level, but it can be a very solid tier 2 sport in America. And even if you're a solid tier 2 sport in America, there's money in that, right? If you can attract 10 or 20, like let's say 20% of the American market, I mean, that's more than the population of South Africa, more than the population of Australia. It's a decent chunk of people. So I think the IRB, World Rugby, realize this, and I think there will be a push towards it, and I think they have to push a World Cup to America. I think 2027 might be a bit early. 2031 would be a good year, but I think they can already start building the foundations there. Obviously, because you've got strong, you've got a strong push of Australian and South African youngsters going to play college rugby over there. So, I think there's very solid foundations there. And if they can put a bit of money, toward this league and get some high-profile players there, like I said, I think it can become a very solid tier 2 tournament type sport over there. And we could host some decent tournaments in America as well, because it's a fantastic country to host tournaments. And like I said, I mean, 50, 60 million people interested in the game over there. That's quite a bit of revenue. And then from there, you got a foundation. And with that foundation, you can essentially push the sport even further. Like, not in our lifetime will it become a tier 1 sport in America. But, we can't be thinking about rugby, us that are custodians of rugby, because that's what we all are. We are custodians of the game. None of us own the game. We're custodians. And if we take a look at it from a custodian viewpoint, you need to think not only in 5-year plans or 10-year plans, you need to think in 100-year plans. You need like really long-term thinking. So the whole thing would be to, get kids over there, get them exposure to the college level, get the college game more competitive, produce 1 or 2 decent American players, send them over to Europe. And, as the years go by, you never know what can happen with the sport. I definitely think there is potential in the USA market, because what the USA needs more than anything, and I'm telling you now, like, soccer is going to become massive in the USA. You take a look at the young talent coming through over there, playing in Europe. They understand. Soccer, they understood it was never going to be a tier 1 sport immediately, but it's a solid tier 2 sport now. And already we're starting to see Pulisic, Giovanni Reina, a couple of other guys, very young guys, playing in the European system and performing very well. With Pulisic, likely, 2-3 years' time, he's going to be a global superstar, and that's going to inspire kids that are 6 or 7, 8 years old now to take up the sport and try and emulate a player like that. And you're not going to get the benefits right now necessarily. You'll be competitive, but you're not going to be world beaters. But if you can get enough kids to aspire to be a Pulisic or a Giovanni Reina in 20 years' time, you could have 3 or 4 of those kids who in turn will, inspire the next generation, and on it goes. You need long-term thinking. You need very long-term thinking. And I just haven't seen a lot of that in terms of rugby administrators over the last couple of years, I'm afraid. Anyway, guys, thanks a lot for taking the time. I know it was a bit of a long one. Let me know if you think we missed anything. Obviously not school rugby related, but it'd be interesting to see how these predictions pan out. What predictions do you have? Leave a comment down below, and thanks a lot for watching and taking the time to listen. It's always appreciated. Don't forget to click that subscribe button as well as bell notification, and catch you on the next one. Cheers. Bye.